church member this week that I was going to preach about Jesus this Sunday, and she said, I'm not coming. Been there, done that, she said. But I said to her that I had preached for 6 years. This is my 6th Easter sermon with you all, and I haven't talked about the Christian part of the Easter story yet. It might be time. So I want you to know that I'm not going to tell you what you have to believe, and I'm not going to suddenly start talking about hell, because we don't believe in hell. So just be reassured, you're going to have to trust me. Some of you may wonder why I'm being so circumspect and hedging this all around with caveats from the very beginning, but others of you, perhaps triggered with some post-traumatic stress, will understand exactly why. So as I have told you before, one of the ways that has meaning to me to approach Bible stories is to approach them in a Jungian way, as if they were dreams. I am one of those people that the parable of the sower is about, and for those of you who are heathens, I will tell you. Sorry, South Carolina word. I will quickly tell you the parable of the sower. Rabbi Jesus told this parable, and he said there was a person sowing seed, and some of the seed fell among weeds where it was choked out, and some of the seed fell along a hard packed path where it just couldn't get in, and other seed fell into fertile ground where it grew and lived happily ever after. Then I am the person who is, for Christian stories, a hard packed path. In my heart and in my life, in my mind and my spirit, those stories have been walked over again and again, and those places in my heart have been walked over and walked over and walked over and walked over until they're just packed so hard, really, it's hard to have anything sink in from that particular tradition. But that doesn't mean I want to deprive you all of that tradition, which may have richness in there for you, as it does for me, too, when I look at it with my healed Unitarian mind. So, any scripture can be approached this way, as if it were a dream, where the Hindu Upanishads or the Buddhist sutras or the Christian and Jewish scriptures. These are stories that have come up through the collected wisdom of humanity. Now, I was trained in Carl Jung from the time I was a baby. My Aunt Ruth was a Jungian analyst, so she talked to me about it. I studied it at Duke. I studied it at Princeton Seminary. Wrote papers about Jung from the time I was 17. And then I studied some more with a retired Jungian analyst named Polly Telford, who was retired from Connecticut, which is where you'd expect to find a Zurich-trained Jungian analyst, but not in Pea Ridge, North Carolina, in the Appalachian Mountains, where she had retired. But she taught me as well. So from all of those teachers, I was asked to picture the collective unconscious, the collected wisdom of humanity, and who knows what else, the collective unconscious as a large sea in which we are islands. And everybody's personal consciousness is like an island surrounded by the sea of human wisdom, stories, folk tales, faith tales, images, and sometimes they wash up on our shores, and sometimes they soak up through the earth of our the island that we are, and they appear. So you find wisdom in, as I said, folk tales and fairy tales and scripture, faith stories. So here we have the story of Rabbi Jesus. It's very probably not historical, the way it happened, which is okay. It's true in other ways. And so Rabbi Jesus serves Western culture as a symbol of deep love, sacrificial love, and as a symbol of inner wisdom. So here's what happens to him. you need to know that the two syllables Jesus are a westernization of his actual name, which was Yeshua. So Yeshua, because we had Western supremacist culture, a Roman supremacist culture back then, in the land where he grew up. And so everything was all about the Romans. So he grew up, Yeshua, and he became a traveling teacher, and he had disciples. He was not the only traveling teacher with disciples. There were 13 or 14 of them, as far as we can tell from historians, right around the same time. But he is the one that we're talking about today. And he said things that got him in trouble with the authorities, both the political authorities and the religious authorities, because he said things that made people think unsafe thoughts about the authorities. He didn't foment revolution in any way. It's just who he was and how he acted. He had female disciples. Nobody did that. He talked respectfully to people of all social classes. Nobody did that. He said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, but render unto God that which is God's. Well, Caesar was kind of supposed to be God back then. That got him in trouble. One of the things that he did during this, what we call Passion Week, I'm going to give you kind of a timeline. The first thing he did last Sunday, we celebrate Palm Sunday. By we, I mean those of us in Western culture and those of us who celebrate the Christian faith. Palm Sunday is when Rabbi Jesus, knowing he was in trouble with the authorities, came back to Jerusalem, walked toward his fear, and showed people who he was. What people were hoping, because people love a big military show of force, don't they? They were hoping he would come roaring into Jerusalem on a big horse, looking like a military conqueror, and that he was going to sweep the occupying forces out with force. But instead, he rode in on a donkey. That was deeply disappointing to some of his fans. It signaled that he was the Prince of Peace, not a Prince of War. It signaled he was going to do things a different way. So many of them said Hosanna anyway and laid palm branches, hence the name Palm Sunday, in front of the donkey as he came back into Jerusalem. And almost everybody was trembling because the authorities were going to come hurt him. Everybody knew that. Did he hide? No. Pretty much the first thing he did was go to the temple where people were changing money. Because, you have to have sacrifices. You buy little doves, you buy little lambs, and you make your sacrifice in the temple. And you've come for Passover from all over the Roman Empire. And so you speak different languages, you have different money. The money changers were in the temple. You know what Jesus did. He came in and he didn't just say, let's have a gradual discussion about how we could maybe change this culture of money changing in the temple. Let's change things gradually so nobody is uncomfortable. He came into the temple and he just took his hand and went whoosh, and turned the tables over. He scattered money everywhere. Pretty shocking. Made it look like he didn't care about money. Nobody doesn't care about money. He didn't like people getting cheated. He didn't like fees being paid. He didn't like handling and shipping fees being added to their cost of the doves. The interest being collected. He just stopped it right there. Then all during the week, he does things that are striking and somewhat odd. I'm going to tell you one of the odd ones because I just think it's interesting. One of the things he did was he stopped under a fig tree for shade and it didn't have any figs. And so he cursed the fig tree He just cursed it. And hence, when the Westboro Baptists come, some people hold up big signs that say, God hates figs. Because of this story. It's truer, maybe. And so, by Thursday, when they were having the Last Supper, people understood that Rabbi Jesus was not interested in changing things in a military way. He was not interested in the mother of all bombs. He was not interested in showing people, teaching people a lesson, whatever. He was interested in going to the root of things, which is why we say radical. Radical means somebody goes to the root of things. He was interested in radical change. And what is at the root of Roman supremacist culture? What was at the root of all of that? That sense that some people are better than other people. That sense that, well, the way things are the way they are. You know, we have Roman rules and everybody just adheres to them because otherwise we wouldn't have peace in the empire. He wanted to make a radical change, but nobody really knew how that was going to happen. Okay, that last meal with his disciples, he is said to have said some shocking things. He broke the bread and said, this is my body. He poured the wine and said, this is my blood. They didn't really get what he was talking about, we think. The earliest account of this Last Supper was written 60 years after it happened. So who remembers exactly? One of his disciples had sold him out to the authorities, to the soldiers, and they came and got him. They took him before the puppet ruler, Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate was torn 5 different directions between the religious authorities and the political authorities, and he just wanted everybody to be happy and leave him alone so that he could live his puppet ruler lifestyle. And he engaged in a little philosophical discourse with Jesus. They say you bring the truth. What is the truth? Jesus really wasn't having any of it. He delivered him over to the soldiers to be tormented. They made him, they beat him up pretty badly. They made him carry his own cross to the place where they crucified criminals. He couldn't do it, apparently. He couldn't do it. And so they grabbed a guy out of the crowd, Simon of Cyrene. He did not volunteer. But when the Roman soldiers grab you by the arm and say, carry this, you carry it because you want to keep your life. It is said, and this is church tradition rather than actual Bible, it is said that a woman named Veronica came out of the crowd and offered him her veil to dry his tears. Church tradition, because it can never leave well enough alone, also said that, he put her veil up to his face and it came away with an imprint of his face on it. My friends, why do people need that? Isn't it enough? Isn't it enough what was already happening? His face had to come away on the veil? Come on. Anyway, she was brave, and she emerged from the crowd. She didn't have to. There's a wonderful Japanese proverb that says, the nail that sticks up will be hammered down. She didn't have to be the nail that stuck up. She didn't have to come out of the crowd, but she did. She was moved with compassion to help him. And then he was crucified alongside 2 other criminals. They left him there to die. There were some people, his mom stayed. And when he was dead, he was put in a cave-like tomb. There are hundreds of them all over Jerusalem. Those tombs from that period, you would have a cave-like opening, and then they would have a cube-shaped stone that they would shove onto like a cork onto the to the entrance to the cave. And some of the cave openings had round stones, but those were mostly queens and kings. So likely he had one that had a cubical stone. You can learn a lot. Your phone knows all of this. You just say to your phone, what were tombs like in the time of Jesus, and it'll give you pictures and everything from Biblical Archaeology Review. The story goes on that Sunday morning, two women came to minister to his body, and they found the tomb uncorked. It says the stone was rolled away, and biblical archaeologists, oh my goodness, you wouldn't believe the number of words that are spent talking about how, well, a cubical stone really could be rolled technically. Again, why do you need that? This is enough of a miracle, okay? The divinity became humanity, was joined with us in our brokenness, in the vicissitudes of life, in hunger and thirst and heartbreak and pain in the body, and then death. And then the tomb was empty. That's not enough. They have to quibble over whether the stone was rolled away or not. Come on. This story is a story of a human dynamic, and a story of a divine dynamic, and a story of the earth's dynamic. And a lot of times in ancient cultures, it is symbolized by a spiral. You go down, 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 down to the center, to the underworld, to death, and then you come back out again. There's a story that was written 1,600 years before Jesus lived. That's a Sumerian poem, modern-day Iraq, a Sumerian poem about a goddess named Inanna who went down, down, down into the underworld to go to her brother-in-law's funeral. And she was at each level of the underworld stripped of something else. She had to give up her crown. She had to give up her breastplate. She had to give up her belt. She had to give up her rings. Finally, her clothes. She was hung on a hook down there by her wicked sister. Hung on a hook for 3 days. She was dead. And then one of her helpers, a little fly, came buzzing down there and whispered in her ear, and she revived and came back up out again. So this is another spiral down into death, back up into life. It parallels the life of a seed, really. Anybody who's a gardener knows when you start a tomato, you put the little seed into the dark earth, and the seed sits in there for a little while until it breaks open. And then life comes up out of the brokenness and seeks the light, and out comes life again. So you're down in the earth, you're broken, life comes back. It's a parallel also with what happens over and over again in a human life, isn't it? I mean, each of us have experiences where we're stripped of everything. If you haven't had it yet, it's coming. Sorry. You lose people you love, you lose places you love, you're frustrated because you can't get something you love, you lose a job that was your identity, your business fails, or you can't conceive when you want to, or you have a heartbreak of any number of kinds, or you're falsely accused of something. You lose, you're stripped away, and finally you feel yourself might as well be dead. And the comfort of the Christian story is that the divinity, God, understands that dynamic, and not only understands from high above, like, oh yes, I've seen this many times, dear one, I'm so sorry you're going through this, but participated in it, in the brokenness. And so one of the points of this Christian story, I believe, is that brokenness is where the light comes in, like the Leonard Cohen song, the crack. There's a crack in everything. That's where the light comes in. Marianne Williamson, a great spiritual teacher, said she had a nervous breakdown, spent some time in the hospital, and she said a nervous breakdown is a highly underrated path to enlightenment. Once you lose everything, you're stronger because you lose some of your fear. You know what it's like down there. We all have helpers in the journey of our brokenness. Somebody who carries things for us for a while, whether voluntarily or not, maybe because they are oppressed by the same authorities which are oppressing us. Maybe out of their compassion they help us. So I think the point of this story is not the point of the churchianity that I was raised with. I say churchianity to separate it from actual Christianity. The churchianity says an angry God killed his son in order to be able to forgive sins, which makes no sense at all. You're God. You could forgive sins if you wanted to. Why you got to kill somebody? But and it also seems like child abuse. I'm sorry if I'm speaking too harshly, but I've been to school. I've been to the end of this road. I know exactly what they teach. And at the end of the road, it doesn't make any more sense than it did in the middle. So it seems like divine child abuse. So that cannot be true because God cannot be a worse parent than you are. Even you would know not to kill your child for some reason. Unless you're, deranged. The point I would take from all of this is that, number one, if you are a disruptor of the system that benefits the powers that be, you're going to get in trouble. And you may as well ride toward it on a peaceful donkey. The reason he died is not because God needed him to die. He died because the powers that be needed him to die. And the deeper point is that love, great love, knows that life will break you, as Chris read. Life will break you. And the great love doesn't stand apart from us, looking at us with pity, but participates in the brokenness with us. And then the great love brings life from brokenness. Leads the way back up to the light again and again. May it be so.